So now we're going to just do a quick motivation meditation. So you should be setting your motivation thinking that going forward from today onwards, I'm going to be a positive human being. I'm going to practice a good heart, and I'm going to, going forward, make this kind of determination to be a good human being, a positive human being. Okay, so we'll meditate on that for a bit. Kanda chilo chunga karejelo. Kanda chilo 50 after, you know, 15 years after what? Allah, okay, listen. So, Vinny, so this I was going to talk to that, and then I thought I better not. It probably wouldn't help. Yeah, it might not work out. So anyway, you know, we first will look at. So we're studying this Buddhist science text, right? So how this came about in this world, like a little bit of background. All of that, everything that's in here was originally taught by the Buddha or based on the teachings by the Buddha. But this was only constructed later, so not constructed, like published later, put together on the request of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So it's based on the Buddhist understanding of mostly on physics, quantum physics. So after after I studied this in the monastery, these subjects, 15 years later, then this book actually came out. Right. So this book is due to the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Mm-hmm. So you should really feel joyful because it's a fantastic opportunity. We're very fortunate to have this fantastic opportunity to be able to study this text. So you should really feel joyful in that.
Oh yeah, that you did it. Nambe, come to the choose some show. Damana, you will tarnish the drama. She lam Jerusalem. She lam Jerusalem. That and that, Kingsang, she never she shared the Nambe, Nambe theory, Nambe theory, Nambe Tangari,
Dibdi. So when we look at the Buddhist practice and what Buddha taught, it can be divided into three aspects. We can say it's first being the base, then the path, and then the result. So this book is looking at the base, and how that comes about. So then it can be looked at in terms of four aspects. It can be looked at in terms of Buddhist science, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist practice. So these are the four aspects of the book.
아니 생긴 거 로디 간데 직시로. 로디 유 간데 시고래. 직제나. 로디 유생이 탐랑 가려. 탐랑을 내가 가려. 기적 성자고. 로디 생기게 강산 가려. 이도 시제냐. 계속 직시에 뭐래서.
So when this book, how it looks at things again in terms of the aspects of, first of all, the object. So the object of perception. So like external phenomena, like a cup or something like that, right? That's one aspect. Then the next aspect is the mind apprehending the object. So that's the apprehender, if you like. And then it's the method that object is apprehended. So how that is actually apprehended or perceived. And then the last one being the person that's doing the perceiving or the apprehending. So these are the four aspects. So then when we have a look at these external objects, then it can be looked at, there's two aspects that divide external objects. So there's that which is changing or impermanent, and that which is unchanging or permanent. So when we look at this changing or impermanent phenomena, this is changing because of causes and conditions. When the causes and conditions change, the object changes. So these impermanent phenomena can then be divided into three other parts. So form or matter, mind, and also what's called non-associated compositional factors. So we're looking at form or matter at this time. So now looking at physical material things, how are these come about? How are things established? Well, it's based on, this is the Buddhist viewpoint, based on very subtle particles. And then when many of these subtle particles come together, then they form grosser and grosser matter. And then out of, many of these subtle particles, then things like cups and tables and all of these things are formed. So that's these subtle particles coming together is how physical material stuff is formed. So when we look at these most subtle particles, then within the four Buddhist tenet systems, there's said to be two different viewpoints on this. So some of those systems hold that there is such a thing as a partless particle. So this most subtle particle is partless. However, the other view is that there's no such thing as a partless particle. So even the smallest particle has parts. So these are the two different views held within the Buddhist tenet or philosophical systems. So there's four of those. Yangawa? Oh. Okay. So when we talk about how these matter is formed, we've talked about it in terms of the composition of like the four elements and the eight parts. So we've looked at that already. However, what we're going to be looking at today is whether these or how it's perceived by the viewpoints of being partless and having parts. So with bigger things like a book or something, you can see, I mean, in the Tibetan system, it talks about the directions north, east, south, west, but you could say top, bottom, left, right. You can easily divide the book up into these parts, right? However, when you get down to the smallest kind of maybe subatomic level, you have these tiny particles where they at this point, some schools say that these are partless, these tiny particles. However, in order to do this, they have to exist independently, because if they had like support, have parts like this other thing would be a part of it. So these particles must be extremely lonely because they're just there all by themselves. So these tiny partless particles are just crying by themselves because nobody wants to talk to them. So don't worry. The other Buddhist system says they're not lonely. They've got some friends that are helping them out. So. Okay, so we'll look a bit today. We're going to look in a bit more deeply into how this is viewed, the partless and the part. Kare di rekpa. Oh, we're not all gone there. No, I'm talking. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, so we're looking at page 227 here. Okay. Okay. So it says the Bandita says they do not make contact. They are discriminating in making contact since their surfaces approach. So here we're talking about the Great Exposition School. We've talked a little bit. It's talked a little bit about. It talks a little bit about the Hindu view or the non-Buddhist view. That was in India at the time, but we're not going to focus on that. We're focusing on the Great Exposition School here. So they're saying that these tiny particles, they come together, but they don't actually make contact with each other, right? So they're formed by many particles coming together. So eight of these particles forms one slightly bigger particle. So these 8 particles of the 4 elements: earth, fire, wind, water, taste, touch, visual form, and particle chame mara. Oh, okay. So sorry, these are partless particles. 8 of these partless particles come together in this way to form one slightly bigger particle that then has these 8 parts. Right. So then it talks about the reasoning, right? that if these particles were to come in contact with each other, then they'd become like a single particle that then would have paths, right? Because then you could posit, okay, a direction, so left, right, or north, east, south, west, when if they came together and made contact. So this is the reasoning why it said these partless particles cannot make contact with other particles, because then that would no longer be partless. They'd be like a particle that has parts. So this is the reasoning behind it. Yeah, di number zero. Number zero. Oh, okay. Okay, so it's just this bit above. So according to the Treasury of Knowledge auto-commentary, the Sabbatisika master Bandanta asserted that if subtle particles were to contact one another, they would possess parts. Yet if there were gaps, then the particles of light would penetrate during day and night, and particles of darkness would penetrate during the night. Sorry, during the day, and then particles of darkness during the night. So, did it? No, did matter. Oh, okay, so did scribble it? No, sorry, I found it now. It's the other Treasury of Knowledge one. Do subtle particles make contact with each other or not? The Kameshri Shandata school says they do not make contact. Why? Because first, if they were to make contact in all spatial directions, their substance would merge. But if they made contact with in a single spatial direction, it would follow that they had parts. But subtle particles do not have parts. Did it? Right. Sorry. Okay. Right. Right. Okay. So then it says that the question arises that if these subtle particles did not make contact, how is it they hold together, right? So if they didn't make contact, they'd just fall down or fall apart. So, however, there's no fault with this, because they're actually able to hold together for two reasons. One, they say the wind holds them together, and the second reason is they have the power to attract and repel each other. So I guess similar to protons, electrons, and neutrons have the power to attract and repel. So these particles have that power to attract or repel each other. And so for this is how they're able to hold together and form larger substances. It's one of the so if the partless particles exist, is that a Buddhist view or a non-Buddhist view? So Chame, the Nambe Tower or Nampe Member Tower? Yeah. So yes, it's a Buddhist view. Within the Buddhist view, there's 4 different schools. So the 2 lower schools, which are called the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School, they believe in partless particles. But then the mind-only school and the middle way school, they don't. So half of the Buddhists, basically. I did. Oh, this. Oh, which one do you believe in? Yeah. I like parts. He believes. I believe in parts. Yeah, I like having friends. So. Okay. So when they say the reason why they come up with, there's reasonings why they say particles have parts, like the smallest particles. But when you come down to why that certain schools hold them as partless is because at some point when you break down. Oh, okay. Sorry. In terms of not like a object possessor or mind, but in terms of a material thing. When you go down into the most subtle, at some point you reach a point where you cannot break it down any further, right? It's the smallest you can go, basically. And at that point, they say it's partless because you can't you can't break it down any more than that.
That is the pointless particle, one of the most beautiful terms I've ever heard.
You like that, do you?
That's what quantum physics states in science of Western science.
Is that the Boson-Higgs particle? They're not divisible.
Higgs is not a particle.
Oh.
What it is, you don't know what it
is. Right.
And that's what's so beautiful about it. They're just saying that the particle concept, where there's multiple particles, each particle can be broken. That's what billions of your tax dollars.
Could have saved some money, you reckon?
And the bigger you get, the more particles.
Right.
So is it? But I'm real curious about this last particle because that's what all of science currently in the quantum world of physics is after.
Yeah.
Origin particle. And this has been thought through. That they're already
the Senrik but the Mambo Tabji any concert the Dul Chame Nyegire. Nye Dini. You know Tanda Nyem it's called Segire, you know Nyema song. The Tanda Badu Nyema song any concert Yun Ring Bolong Donzo did Samla Tangire. Yeah, so it's like there's no need to waste their money, right? On this, they can just read this book. Yeah, so don't waste all your time and money, you know.
One thought in quantum theory is that to build a collider, to break the last parts, to get to the origin particle, would require an accelerator ring and power beyond our comprehension. But the ring would have to be similar to the orbit of Jupiter.
Oh, cool. Really? Oh, okay. All right. So, just to repeat it, in order to get enough, momentum, or they collide to break it down, right?
Yeah.
So enough speed.
Yeah, well, the speed of light is what However, the velocity behind them and the power behind that to break down, they thought they were the origin particle with the big boson,
Right.
which has recently been discovered through the guy Hitler. But the beauty in this is that it just opened the door.
Oh, okay. So now they want to build a bigger collider.
Well, the beautiful part to me is that this particle is what they talk about. Is the next break. The next thing that you break open will be a particle. It won't be a particle. It'll be a probability of the existence of something. Is the way Western science says it.
Okay.
That can't be perceived.
Right.
And these guys figured this stuff out 600 years without any instrumentation.
Okay, I don't know if I can repeat all of that. So basically, the scientists are basically searching for a base part, like this partless particle, the origin particle, which they thought was the Higgs boson particle, but that when they looked that, it just opened up the door to more stuff. But to get a collision fast enough to present the evidence for this partless particle, they'd have to build a ring that would have to go around the orbit of Jupiter. Yeah. Yeah, and the energy that would be needed is beyond our comprehension. Okay, the Tiwamara, Douglas. Yeah.
That's good. Oh, that is shit. That is chirabo. That dodeva. Dodeva. That and the chiramo gilea. Many chami ima kanshila. And machewa yes lava. Maribus, Mateo. 아니 딜라야 하루요 동자요 지금 이제 너데 거기 참이 임바 관심이라 말을 지고래 다 딜라 동자요 말이지
Okay.
어디 시고 다들 스타일로
Okay. So when we talk about the Great Exposition School, the first school, they hold that these particles don't make contact with each other and that there's a gap between them, like a tiny gap between these particles. However, the Sutra school, which is another Buddhist view, holds that these particles don't make contact, but there's no gap between them. So this is their view, that there's no contact, but there's also no gap. Right, so they're not making contact, but they're extremely close and there's no gap, no space between them. Oh, right. 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 Okay. So this goes on to the bit that I read before. According to the Treasury of Knowledge Autocon entry, the Sasantrika master Bhadananta asserted that if subtle particles were to contact one another, they would possess parts. Yet if there were gaps, then particles of light would penetrate during the day and particles of darkness would penetrate during the night. So although there exists no such gaps, particles exist without touching each other. So according to the Sutra school's view, this would be the problem, because if there were gaps, then light or darkness, they hold darkness as form as well. So light or darkness, which are both form, would be able to penetrate. And this would cause like a contradiction. This wouldn't be okay. So therefore they say there's no gap between them, yet they don't actually make contact. Okay. So the Oh, okay. So they say there's also no gap, because if there were a gap, then this would cause a problem, because these particles being partless, they wouldn't, like, you'd then be able to say there was a gap on a certain side, right? Like a direction northeast, southwest. And because they're directionless, then this would cause a problem. So this is why they said that there's no gap, because in order to have a gap, then they would have to have a direction for that gap to be in. Okay. So they also hold that this light and also darkness is form, because during the day you can see, so the light has form, and at night it's black, so therefore that's form as well. So if there was a gap, these would penetrate, and this creates another problem. So this is why they say there's no gap. Right. Oh, maybe so. Oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah. So another reason why these particles don't make contact is because they have this hot and cold particles, right? Now, hot and cold particles are mutually exclusive. So this is why they can't contact with each other. Because if they were to make contact, then they'd have to become like one thing, and you can't have hot cold. Like you can't. I mean, that doesn't exist, right? It's either hot or cold. You can't have hot cold. So therefore, they can't make contact with each other. Right. Yeah. So in this way, that's why they said to be close, because if you have hot particles, that kind of repels the cold, right? It will push the cold particles out. If you have a group of hot particles together, they'll push away the cold particles. So this is why they can't make contact with each other, because they can push each other out. Yeah, something like protons and electrons, that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so this gives you the basic overview. If you want, right. So if you want to know more, you can read the book. So I've given you like the key, but here's the door. You can go open it yourself. Okay. Oops.
한국이 뭐 그런 거 동생 이번에 근데 저도 요래서 봐 저시 참고 그 거대 요래다가 유튜브야 저시 이제 빙원 이제 한 주된 다 말이고 이제 대대 요래다 지나면 더 쉐어
True.
유튜브 배너 유튜브이나 저 시제
and Yama.
빙원 유튜브 말이고 이제 대대 타니도 되어서 봐
Yeah.
이제 다 참여래라고 알았잖아 이 참여 말했다 이 자제했다 간다 차단 제대로했어 근데 우마와 생각보다 자제고 당이 참여했다 그래서는 다 대대도 거기 지자 자원은 저렇게도 그보다는 거는 공원도 되는 다 뒤에 중다 얘기 아니 거기 지자 자원은 저렇게도 지금 다 둘이 찍대 투고이는 상마 유전직 차로다. 다 되나?
Okay.
예. 아니 요 두고 다음에 거지나 다 대제대 두고 상마 찍 거서 찍어 나는데나 아니 유전 추주 찍을 차 두개로 차로 그냥.
Okay.
그다음 뒤에 다 차는 게 단다 두 개에 유전을 거잖아. 유지베리 뭐 어디다.
Okay, so we're moving on to page 229. So it says here, if 6 converge at the same time, an atom would have 6 parts. Starting with D. The signature did it. Did it. Okay. So yeah, if the 6 converge at the same time. Above that. Okay, so I guess it's this paragraph. As for the Madhyamika and Chittamatra masters, they do not accept indivisible partless particles. In fact, in their writing, numerous logical arguments are presented to refute the concept of individual subtle particles. For example, the following refutation of indivisible particles occurs in Vasubandhu's 20 verses. If one were to analyze the smallest discrete particle as it's asserted to be partless, one must admit that it possesses parts. For when a single particle alleged to be the smallest elementary particle is surrounded on 6 sides, there are 4 cardinal directions and above and below, one must accept that the particle at the center has parts, since the side of the central particle facing east does not face south or west, and so on. If this were the case, then the particles residing in the remaining 5 spatial directions would exist at the spatial locus of a subtle particle in the east. In this case, all 6 particles will erroneously merge into one. And if their spatial locations merge, then consequently, no matter how many subtle particles accumulated, they could never compose a coarse physical mass, for their physical dimensions would remain the same as that of a single particle. Yeah, so basically, just what he said was, yeah, so to have these 6, so they have northeast, southwest, and up and down. So these 6 partless particles, well, smallest particles, come together to form like a slightly bigger particle. But in order for that to happen, then the smallest particle has to have a top, a bottom, and a left, up, northeast, southwest. Yeah, it has to have dimensions, because if it didn't have dimensions, then when the other particles met, they would all just kind of merge into one small particle, right? Without being able to surround it, they just and no matter how many came together, it wouldn't get any bigger. It would just remain the same tiny particle. So you wouldn't be able to make bigger matter like cups and so forth. Right, so this is why I believe particles have parts. This is one reasoning. Okay. Okay. So they can't. The other reason is that the particles are distinct from each other, right? So in order to be distinct, they have to have 2, minimum of 2, to be distinct from each other. You can't have one thing being distinct for itself, right? So therefore, you need 2 particles. So this is why, this is why they have parts.
그러나 숨쉬 되려. 다들 탐에 차슈 유되라. 차슈 되라. 차슈 되라. 아니 콜라 되요. 초요. 초 차요. 단도 콘 지라면 너대 위시하게 그게 전부 되려고. 평상시에 그게 전부 될 초요. 제일 처음에는 이번에 니마 샤그로 니마 샤요 이제 유리 처음에 까지 니마 포바다 마포바 니마 유사 니마 매바디 니메디 여기까지 아니 니마 매우서 그랬어.
Okay, block.
유딜라 참에는 거의는 니마래도. 니마가 아니지.
Okay, yeah. Right. Yeah.
이게 뭐 되는 거야?
So then they also say, well, the high school views, right? They say that, well, you say these particles don't have directions, right? Because if they're directions, they'd have to have parts, like north, east, south, west is a part. So you say they don't have parts, but they have directions, because if they didn't have directions, then, if the sun were to hit an object, it couldn't stop the sun, right? Like you can't stop the sun on the east side or the north side or whatever side the sun's shining from if you don't have that side. So if you don't have that direction, you can't stop the sun from that direction. Does it make sense? Yeah. So yeah, if the sun's coming from the east, you have to have the east side of a particle in order to block that light. Okay. Okay.
이나 듀기 참여를 되래. 그 세배 차이로니까 차제 참여 말했어. 콜라 듀기 참여 듀들 마심 그때 듀 딜레 차와다 민둑세야지. 그러니까 딜레다 여체 민둑세야지 요래서 그렇지. 이나 딜레야 듀데 초기 참여 말이라. 콜 듀기 차요 말했어. 이나야 콜라 차요 차가르는 세배 차. 세배 차요 콜라. 세배디
Okay, so all of the views hold to like the most subtle particle. So it's described as the most subtle particle because it's the most. Obviously, they didn't have scientific machinery at the time. So what they, the beings who had really the highest levels of concentration, mental concentration, were able to actually look down, and as far as they could break they could break a cup down into smaller parts of tiny parts. And when they got to the smallest part that they couldn't break down any further, then that's said to be the most subtle particle, right? Now this most subtle particle is what the lower two schools hold as being partless, and the higher two schools say no, this still has parts, right? Because if it's perceived by the mind perceiving it is then part of that. So the mind is a part of this. So it still has parts, right? Yeah, and also it has causes. So therefore, causes a part, and it has a result, which is also a part. Yeah. So it's got a lot of help to sort of hang out. Right.
So is the emptiness also kind of looking at this direction to see anything?
So the Tongbanyi Tawadiru. Oh, sorry. Is this when you talk about emptiness? Is the emptiness looking in this direction to understand this philosophy? So the Tongbanyi nangla the cha do tramo the kande hoku guduru.
the deeper and the some of the Yawolena
Right. So if you understand this clearly, it can really help you to understand this view of emptiness.
그래서는 그냥 먼저 탭라로 돼. 아, 탭 처음부터 세그러와. 다 탭 처음부터 가도 되지. 죽으래.
So, for example, if you say book, right, or you can say this book's really big, this big book, right? But when you actually look at like where the book is and you break it down into the pages and then down into the particles, then where's the book, right? Like that, and then this is what helps to understand emptiness. Okay, so but breaking down this book into smaller parts and not finding the book, that's not emptiness. Like some people think, oh, that's not the emptiness of the book. Sorry. Some people think that you break it down, and you can't find it. That's actually the emptiness of the book. But that's a mistaken way to think. So then what is the emptiness of the book?
So how we continue there and so it's not emptiness of the book, and then how to continue.
Okay, so if that's not the emptiness of the book, then how do we continue on? So just a sec. Deb kitonga ni mare mayina then kandi gomgire kandi hago gido then courage gire.
You clear the question? Later.
One quantum theory is there is no.
So the quantum physics knowledge konzo tawa mara konzo theory hago gido. So the chikshina dire chikshina di mare. So konzo samla thang tongbani yo mare ro. This something no. Yeah, right. I think they should forget about that because there's definitely emptiness. Right, yeah, I think they should leave emptiness alone. It's a bit tricky for them. Right. Right. Okay. Okay, so when we look at it then, looking at what the emptiness is when you break it down into the particles, right? So you break the book down into its parts, so the pages, but then you break the pages down and there's no pages either because it's just a collection of parts. So when you break it down, and even this most subtle particle is only labeled on an appearance to the mind, right? So this is appearing to the mind, and then that's labeled by the mind, right? So on this appearance, or the name, It's the name basically. So it says it's named, and so this is very difficult because if you don't believe in the mind, like if you don't hold this view of the mind, if you say brain is the final thing, then emptiness is you can't really understand it, right? It's related to this named by the mind. So all phenomena is merely a name made by the mind or imputed by the mind. Right. So it's other than the name, this kind of this like solid or tangible, maybe you could say in this case, tangible thing that is the book that you can't find. Sorry, that doesn't exist. Okay, so then the scientists were breaking down like this light part, the so they were trying to break down the light, and smaller and smaller until they couldn't find anything, right? And then when they couldn't find anything, then they kind of like, okay, they would give up, right? So this was at Sarah Monastery. This happened. Okay. Yeah. So. So the point is here that this book exists as a collection of many parts, so the cover, the pages, and so forth. But then each of those parts is broken down into these very, until you get down to a subatomic level of the particles that come together to form this book. So, however, this book is merely labeled by the mind, right? Other than that, doesn't have any existence. So, however, you can't say that the book doesn't exist because you can say the book's bad or good or heavy or light. So because you can attribute these aspects to it, then therefore the book exists. But how the book exists is merely as a label by the mind. Okay. All right. So, so we tend to view it that when the collection of the causes and conditions, or as you could say, the parts come together, then it forms an actual book, right? Like that's yeah, so that 100% exists from its own side. Book. Very staunch and solid. Okay, so when you search for that independently existent book, yeah, and you can't find that book, that independently existent book or existing from its own side book, that the absence of that is the emptiness of the book. Or not finding that is the emptiness of the book. Okay, so this is why it says in the sutra that not seeing is the final seeing or the ultimate seeing.
Because the concept is the part. The concept is the part.
Okay, so
Without the concept, there's no particle, there's no good.
so the concept of the particle is the particle, right? So without that concept of the particle, there'd be no book. So the do tramo di samba di do tramo yin, right? The samba mena, the concept mena, then the deb zanga yomare, right? Yeah. So it doesn't come without that, yeah. Yomare doesn't exist. No.
네, 근데 생기 뒤에다 견아 세우 쉬우지.
Yeah.
소다브리가 주진 도말리디 소다브리가 미기 컨셉 이지지기야 말이야.
Oh, South America.
소다브리가
Oh, okay.
주진 전부 통만요래 민 권요야 말이야.
네.
주진이 뭐 이제요 말이야. 생각날 이제거든. 주진 권은 통구야 말.
Okay. So it was, I think South Africa, South America.
소다브리가
Okay, well, I heard this story happening in South America, but Geshe seems to have heard it in South Africa.
아브리가 말이야. 아메리카.
America, right, South America. So yeah, I think it is South America. When natives, when I think it was Columbus, whoever first arrived on these massive boats, they couldn't actually see the boats because they could not conceive of such a thing existing. That, like this massive ship, was so beyond their conception they couldn't even see it.
네, 심 가족이 이제 지고이면 저도가 삼 타줘야 말아.
Yeah.
삼을 가져야지 제일로는 이유도 두고요. 그래요.
Right. So we can the only objects we can say that exist are the ones we can conceive to exist. Right? Without conceiving them to exist, then we can't posit them as existing. Okay. So the concept is the particle. So the to tramo di sambayan, right?
진짜 대라고다. 그나 대라고 다단다 남바기 그때다 니세 무시라고 도도 니게 유대 참여사 공무사도라고 소는 탭도 탭도 세워질라 아니 탭도 니게 세워지 제일도 그래.
Okay.
The
The debutanchirama. Okay, so then the debnamlang Oh, okay. Okay, so what's the meaning in the book is basically the two lower schools, the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School. They hold that first of all the particles come together and then they form a book first, and then after that the mind perceives the book. So the book exists first, and then the mind perceiving the book, or the I consciousness perceiving the book comes into.
that's my some shape down the that sim number zero. So that is sim danny zamjista. Sim passation, sim chibo session. Sim danny.
These sim samba.
Sim number one. Yellow that.
Oh, right. So.
웃음기 두다만 참여 미제죠. 그다음에 시외 주는 타도서 타대입니다. 타대해야 됩니다. 타대와 찍교만 타대 내거를 주는 참여죠. 심담만에서 유대시가 당번에 치료될 수가 요와시 멤버 세배 나와차 세배기 신나 낭자다는 로라 를 차시에 치료 유치면 그다음에 생기 차시에 어디에서 가고요. 제가 됐습니다. 최단계 쓰기 다니던 를 차시에 라면도 네 고den데 가고 싶어요.
Okay, so then the mind only school, yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's later. So the religion is the magic maker, and the editor I think it's this one. Thus the followers of Kandanda say the world is necessarily created through particles merging and combining. Furthermore, their unattached natural essence of interpreting gaps is... Oh, no, wait a minute. No, that's still on the gaps. Oh, nearly at the end. Oh, okay. Here. Wisdom mentions that taking the basis of. Oh yeah, this looks like us. Yep. Okay. Alright. So, despite the fact that Majjhimika and Chittamatra thinks is similar in rejecting the notion of partless indivisible particles, the final grounds on which they reject indivisible particles are different. For the Chittamatrans, there is no such thing as an atom that has an objective external reality, so it is called an atom, represents a subtle state defined in terms of a progressive division undertaken on the basis of what is conceived in the mind. Therefore, composite coarse physical entities formed through the aggregation of such particles are but perceptions of the mind and thus not objective external reality. This is a standpoint shared similarly by the Swatantra Majjhimika masters. So basically, it's not entirely clear in here. But basically what they're saying here is that because its existence is based on perception by the mind, then the mind perceiving the object becomes part. So that's a part of it, right? It doesn't exist independently from the mind perceiving it, according to the Chittamatrans or the mind-only school. So therefore, this mind becomes a part, one part. Okay, so for example, if you think about the cup. Right. Right. So we can say there's one cup, right? But the cup that I'm seeing is not the cup that you're seeing. So are we all seeing the same cup? Oh, sorry, so that's not right, yeah. We are seeing the same cup, but the way I'm seeing the cup and the way you're seeing the cup is not the same. So the cup that I'm perceiving is the appearance of the cup to my mind or my consciousness.
To get to the label of cup, several might come to a standard that brings in a definition of what is a cup.
Right.
And then there's still a variety. Yeah. So it's conventional labeling to be able to interact with people.
Right. So the cup and the book, etc., are conventional labels that people can agree on. This is a cup, this is a book. In order that we can communicate and interact with each other. So, yeah. So the cup tang te ming ta kind of me hakogidu or midsama di cup re drinkidu ro and it did debre drinkidu. The ming mena then in answer catch a shit to be married. So the gyunsen latini di cup then did not catch a shaggy gyunsen ro. Yeah, that's right. Okay. The Chandrakirti, okay. Oh, okay. Here we go. I think this is it. As for the great Majjhimika masters of the Prasangika Majjhimika school, such as Chandrakirti, whenever it is a subtle atom or coarse physical entity formed by them, apart from their reality as mere imputation designated by the mind in terms of this or that, they admit that nothing can be found objectively as being this or that phenomenon. Therefore, it emerges extremely clearly from their writings these thinkers do not accept the notion of indivisible particles or indivisible moments of consciousness. So basically what's being said there is what you said, that there's nothing objectively that can be said to be cup. It's merely something that is labeled by the mind, right? So there's no cup that exists. It's just that conventionally we agree that this is a cup, so therefore it's labeled cup. Other than that, there is no cup, right? So there's nothing you can find to be cup objectively.
이 포버리스가 이게 먼저 켈렌이 미만을 깨져 말이야. 야 미만고게 이 포버디 추주를 라비나.
Right.
이나리 내 미지기 포버리스가 무슨 미만샤 이 추주를 라비나. 포버디 추주 차가 말이야.
Right.
켈렌이 만용 깨져 말이야.
Okay.
포버리 라바이라 포버이 세면 뇌제면
Okay, valid. Okay. However, we've got to be understanding that this is not merely a conventional sort of thinking, right? Like if you were a group of people who said, if you said this is a cup, but everybody else in the room said no, that's not a cup, or everybody else in the existence said that's not a cup, that's a clock, doesn't mean the cup becomes a clock. It has to be a designation by valid cognition, right? So this is important. It's Tanya. Yeah. Okay, so no, it's more like established. So established by valid cognition. So it's not. If everybody said something ridiculous, it wouldn't actually become that thing, right? Right. So this goes back to the boats, that there was no label for that ship, so therefore it doesn't exist. The Trichembo di Jawara Konsa di Kogimendo so diffo di Yumare. Right. So it didn't even appear to their minds because it was so beyond their conception. You Christian? Oh, valid cognition. The sema correct. Okay, correct. Okay, so when we talk about a valid cognition, right, it's a mind that is unmistaken, right, that perceives things correctly. So, for example, if you were to say this cup is like a cow, that's even if you perceive that, that's a mistaken perception, right? They use examples of like a blue snow mountain, right? That's mistaken because the snow mountain's white. So it has to perceive things in a correct, unmistaken way to be considered a valid cognition. So the sema dang semen so labgire. Right. Right. So then it's done by your own checking, right? If it's valid or not. Right. Okay. Okay. So to establish something is valid, you can do it through direct perception. So this is why we say that snow is white, because we can perceive directly, provided, there's no problem with our eyesight. People see the snow. So this is direct perception. Okay, so like unmistaken consciousness, right? Or basically a properly functioning eye consciousness. And then the other one is reasoning. Like if you hear a car driving on the road, you can infer, oh, that's a car, because you hear the sound of a car. So that's a valid inferential cognition. So there's a direct valid cognition and an inferential valid cognition.
Couldn't you say valid, make the equal possible?
So to be valid, wouldn't you have to take the ego out of it? So nanzo did sema yuna dini tag kogimare, ego kogimare. Sema yuna ego me kogire. Tagzen. Tagzen me kogire. Yeah, well, if you want the perception without ego, then you have to have a direct realization of emptiness. so it might be a bit tricky.
We have no cognition. So we're like embryonic in this language we're trying to discover.
So
We know what we don't know.
yeah. So in this cosmos, there's so much we don't know about, right? So we're like embryonic, I guess, or there's a vast amount we don't know. So the universe di nang lano di nanzo pe chung chung mato haku gi manduro so dini nanzo di zang mang cheo haku gi manduro.
근데 이 레벨 뒤를 보는데 레벨 자체 추진이 그지 주고 말라. 옛날시 나도 심기 이제 야자
Alright. Yeah, so like in science they say that you only use like 5-10% of your brain or something like whatever it is, right? I don't know. But it's the same with us with our minds. Like we're only using maybe 5-10% if you're lucky of your mind. Because the proof of this is we always, every day we talk about the same boring crap, right? It's like, how are you this morning? Did you sleep well? What did you eat? It's like, yeah. So we just regurgitate the same nonsense day after day, and it seems to make us somehow happy for whatever reason, right? Okay, so we'll stop here. Okay, so can I find it in here? It's the 4 reasonings or 4 perceptions or no. I've got it in here somewhere. Yeah, so this is for next week. I did have it in here somewhere. There's the 3. I lost it. It's in must have fallen out. Okay, 57. Oh, here it is. So ascertaining reality with the 3 types of objects, and then analysis grounded in the 4 principles. So then there's the nature of phenomena and the aspect, or no, keche, like the aspect. So the aspect of the nature of the object possessor, and then the aspect of phenomena. Okay, and that's it. Okay, and if you want to meditate, then you need to think about whether the book arrives first or the mind perceiving the book, which comes first. So then, okay. So if you can really understand type of meditation, which really helps with emptiness, to really think about how the book is arising, the causes of the book, and the result of the book, and all of these things. And if you can clearly understand this, then this is really goes a long way to helping to understand emptiness.
Next time, then I take you.